Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad and Magic Podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things, and welcome to episode 51.
I feel like we've done more episodes than that. I feel like I'm talking to you all the time.
Well, it's just 51. Is
You
there
know,
something special about the number 51?
Well, it's something very strange about 51. I think there's going to be something very strange about this episode because we're hearkening back to Area 51, Ben.
Ooh.
You've heard of Area 51, of course.
Yes, the X-Files music is playing in my head right now.
All right, not the official name. I'm not going down the conspiracy theory nonsense path. Everybody knows that stuff. Here's the real facts, people. And you can find these everywhere on Wikipedia. So it's a U.S. Air Force installation that's nestled in the Nevada Test and Training Range. That's the range where the Air Force basically owns half of the state of Nevada, and they dropped a bunch of nuclear bombs and stuff there.
Right, so we'll never build anything there.
So no one will ever do anything there ever. It's a remote detachment. It's administered by Edwards Air Force Base, and largely it's used as testing for new aircraft, like secret projects and that kind of thing. Like SR-71 was tested there. Originally, it was acquired in 1955 to test fly the U-2, which is the closest thing that we have to manned satellites, essentially, that thing flies so high.
Yeah.
It's officially called Homey Airport or Groom Lake, depending on who you're talking to.
Homey Airport, really?
Homey?
Like,
H-O-M-E-Y.
what's up, homie?
I think Homey, the vernacular, is spelled H-O-M-I-E.
Oh, okay. This is not H-O-M-I-E?
No, this is H-O-M-E-Y.
Oh, well then.
This is a very highbrow difference, okay? Lastly, this part is kind of interesting, is that the U.S. government didn't officially acknowledge the existence of the airfield that is commonly known as Area 51 until 2013.
What happened in 2013?
Oh, nothing. There was a Freedom of Information Act request that was put in 2005 asking about Area 51, and begrudgingly, the CIA finally came out and acknowledged, yes, that is an airfield that we have to test things. Here's a bunch of redacted documents acknowledging its existence.
8 years? Josh, okay, I don't know about you, but I've processed a FOIA request. You have 2 weeks to turn it around.
No, you have 2 weeks to respond to it. That doesn't mean you have to actually say anything about it.
Well, apparently the CIA stalled for 8 years before they finally answered the question.
Yes, just long enough for them to shred all the important files.
Okay. Well, there was the real facts on Area 51. Anything else?
I think in those 8 years, they needed that time to move the Ark of the Covenant to a more secure location.
I thought you said you weren't going to engage in the conspiracy theory stuff.
Well,
All right,
I had to do that
so
one.
for last time, I had mentioned that Minecraft was the best-selling video game of all time, but I hadn't actually done any research on it. So I went and I found a Time magazine article from 2016 that gave the numbers, and 2016 was a long time ago, but these numbers changed so slowly that it's probably still correct. And this was, they were counting that Minecraft had just crossed over 100 million copies sold. Now, there's lots of kind of different versions, and we're in the day and age of like constantly evolving software, so it's a lot harder to count. But they called it the second best-selling game of all time. What do you think the number one best-selling game of all time is if it's not Minecraft?
It's going to be something basic. I want to say
Yeah.
Tetris.
Yes, nailed it. Well done.
Yes, I am a gamer.
So Tetris is a juggernaut. You know, the indefatigable all-time best-selling video game is Tetris, but it's kind of cheating. You know, what the difference between like the one on the Game Boy or the one on the Nintendo 64? But ultimately, I guess if you call all of those the same game, it's sold like 500 million copies.
Listeners, if you're asking yourself why are we taking the time in this podcast to correct a minor point of what's the best-selling video game of all time, then you're listening to the wrong podcast. If you're the person that's like, yes, finally they fixed that glaring error that was driving me nuts for the last 2 weeks, welcome back.
Yes. Okay, so I want to one-up you. I want to one-up myself now because I have another correction to make, and that is you were talking about a story you had in your family when you taught your parents to play Ticket to Ride.
Yes.
And I listened to the podcast again, as I do every time after we record it, and you talked about the one time that your mom bought 2 short routes and blocked everyone from doing it. Josh, that's against the rules.
Is it really?
Yeah. You can't. The same rail company can't buy two of the same lines down the same path.
Really? I don't think any of us were aware of that rule.
If your mom's listening to the podcast, I'm sorry, but you cheated.
I think we're gonna go ahead and ignore that rule because it makes it a lot more fun to troll people with that.
Oh, man. It's like, you can build as many hotels on any property as you want. Screw the rules about you can only have two.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. But in this situation, it's super funny, and it sets back the other player. Like, if you're going to spend 2 turns doing nothing but putting down a 1-point rail line just to mess with all your opponents, I think that's a decent trade-off.
Okay, but here's the thing. Per the rules, you can still do that. You just have to team up with somebody to do it.
Oh, no team-ups. There's no such thing as teaming. All right, you must have read a different version of the Ticket to Ride rules than I am aware of, and I don't like your version, so I'm going to stick with my story.
All right. One other follow-up I want to do from last time is last time we introduced the concept of Mark Rosewater's 10 things every game needs, and I think they're great, and we'll be using them going forward. But we had some engagement on the subreddit, reddit/r/bad@magic, and the person liked the point we'd kind of gotten to at the very end where we were talking about turn length. And it doesn't really fit neatly into any of the 10 things, so I'd like to add it as the bad at magic, like 11th thing every game needs. And I was trying to think of a name for it. And what I want to call it is minimizing downtime.
That's a good one, because that's really what it is you don't want people sitting around just twiddling their thumbs while other people are having fun.
Right. So there's lots of ways you can minimize downtime. It could be short turn length. It could be rapid gameplay. It could be everyone can do something at once, or the game, is predictable enough that you can plan your next turn or something. You just need something so that, like you said, you're not sitting around not doing anything for long periods of time.
Right. That could be interaction, like Mark Rosewater talks about. If every time somebody's doing something, you have some opportunity to interact with it, or they're interacting with you, that is also not downtime.
Yeah, it's interesting you point that out, because sometimes Magic the Gathering can become like this, where you're just sitting there watching your opponent play Magic and you can't do anything.
Yes, I like to play the decks where my opponent can't do anything. It's super frustrating to be on the receiving end of it.
I do a little bit to some extent. Okay, so we are officially adding that as an 11th thing that every game needs. We're calling it minimize downtime.
Excellent. Big fan.
All right. I think that's all my cleanup stuff. Now, I had a Ben versus Bureaucracy tale to tell you that I haven't told you yet. I didn't text you or anything about this. So you told your drive-thru story where you went to Arby's and the girl told you to pull forward and you wanted to get into a staring contest, but your wife talked you out of it.
All right. So that's Ben's version. Nicole, if you're listening, that's what he said. I didn't say that. Go ahead.
Okay. So this week, I had my 4 kids in the car with me. I pulled into the Taco Bell drive-thru and I placed our order. And then the girl looks at me and she says, "Could you please pull forward? I'll bring it out to you." And as I always do when this happens, I think of you. And I'm like, sure, okay. So we pull forward and I kind of look at my watch and I start a timer and I'm like, how long is this going to take? Now, while we were pulled forward, 3 cars went behind us. And then within 2 minutes, somebody came out and brought us our food. And I pulled away and I thought, oh, that was a great experience. Can't wait to tell Josh. Because 1, other people got help that didn't have a big order like we do. And 2, everything came out just like we needed it on time and we didn't wait that long. So, like 2 days later, I'm in the McDonald's drive-thru. Now, Josh, I want to point out that we don't normally eat out this much. But as you know, a week ago, I got the keys to this house we're in. So like we're still moving. I'm tired at the end of the day. I don't want to cook dinner.
Everybody that has ever moved to a new house knows that there's like a 2-week window where all bets are off when it comes to food. It's just whatever junk that you can get into your face.
Right. So we're into the second week of that, and I'm in the McDonald's drive-thru, and I order, like a 20-piece chicken nuggets and 6 orders of fries, and they asked me to pull forward. I'm like, okay. So I pull forward, and I'm sitting there, and cars are going, and nobody's coming out, and I'm like, crap, I'm going to have to go in. Now, this is I don't know what it's like in Arizona, but in Louisiana, they were on like the tail end of the big outbreaks, and they still hadn't quite let up all of the COVID protections yet. So when we got here, it was kind of interesting that we got here like the day after people stopped wearing, there was a state mandate to wear masks and stuff, and a lot of the restaurants' dining rooms are still closed.
Wow, okay.
So this particular McDonald's, the dining room is still closed. So I wasn't sure if the door was even going to be unlocked.
You're just going to have to pound on the door like a crazy person. Give me my chicken nuggets.
Yeah, so I go up there and I knock on the door and they're like, what order?
Get out of town. Really?
Luckily, because I normally eschew paper, like I hate paper receipts and stuff like that, but I had a feeling something bad might happen, so I was holding my receipt and I'm like, yeah, here's my order, and they're like, okay, and they're like, oh, these bags here, and they hand me a couple of bags, and I go home and they did not have the 20-piece nuggets in it.
You didn't check before you left.
Oh, I did. It was okay. These were big bags and there was stuff piled inside, and I kind of thought I saw it.
I know that feeling, but at the same time, you've already had one thing has already gone bad in this whole interaction. So you have to assume that the whole interaction is completely messed up.
You're right. That's where I went wrong. And you're right. Once one thing goes bad, you got to go full on trust but verify.
Not
like
even
Ronald
trust.
Reagan.
No, you've broken trust. You said to pull forward and wait.
Don't trust and verify.
No trust. Verify everything.
You set up a contract. You broke it. All bets are off.
Yes, exactly. You have completely destroyed any amount of social credibility that you could possibly have achieved.
Okay, so we live 6-minute drive from McDonald's, and there's this really narrow window of time where they still might remember your face. And if you come after that, you just look like some crazy person demanding free food. You know what I mean?
You actually went back?
Yes.
Yes, he did. That's the sound of Ben going back.
Well, that's the thing, because I only got enough food for some of the people, but not all the people.
No,
without the nuggets, there just wasn't enough food.
Wait, the 20-piece nuggets was for one person, though.
No, 2 or 3 kids.
Oh, well, a 20-piece nugget is my typical lunch at McDonald's.
So I got back there and I went inside and then they didn't have the nuggets and I had to stand there. And the dining room's closed. All the chairs are up on the tables and the lights are off. And it was weird standing in a closed dining room demanding that they make me some nuggets. So they made me nuggets and I took them back and I kind of thought it was over. Then, 2 nights later, I ordered pizza.
Okay, from where?
Papa John's.
Ah, the best pizza.
It is the best pizza. So I placed the order on the app, and I'm kind of watching the app because it you can track the driver and stuff like that.
Wow, that's cool.
And the app said 49 minutes. 59 minutes pass, 69 minutes pass, and the driver finally shows up at the door, and I get the no contact notification. He sends me a text, and I go outside, and he's already driving away. And I look down, and there's only 2 of the 3 items. So I'm thinking maybe it's still in his car. So I call the number that had texted me. I'm like, dude, where's the 2-liter root beer? And he goes, they didn't give me one at the store. Now, I didn't think of this till later, but there's this interesting thing when you have this mediary of a driver that they have a responsibility to do the trust but verify thing at the head end so that they don't show up at your house missing an item and now they're the one that screwed up.
You're right. This is the first person in the chain of quality control that could possibly find these problems if they were so inclined.
But he just passed the buck on it. He's like, they didn't give me the 2-liter and they told me I had everything and I trusted him and left. But I think that can't be right. They got to also give him a receipt and he's got to look at it and be like, okay, I'm missing a thing. Give me the thing. But
you're attributing way too much checks and controls on a minimum wage pizza boy.
Okay, but there are checks and controls. I'm getting to that. So I
called corporate.
But because I'd ordered online and it was contactless, I'd already tipped him. I'd already given him $7 for bringing 2 pizzas to my house and for getting my $3 2-liter of root beer.
Ooh, yeah, that's a generous tip for somebody screwing up your order.
Yeah. Exactly, but I'd already done it. I couldn't take it back or whatever. So he's driving back. The pizza's cold because it
took an hour.
Yeah, exactly. So I call the store and tell them what happened, and it's already just miscommunication and poor understanding. I'm like, hey, the driver showed up and you didn't have my 2-liter. What was your name again? Okay, here's the order number. Look it up. And they have I don't know. I feel like I stumbled into some area where people do fraud a lot and I wasn't prepared.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they just expect that you were just trying to get free food out of them.
Yes, exactly. So I said, they're like, okay, sir, we'll have someone bring it out to you. I'm like, no, then I'll have to tip them too. And I don't, we're already done eating dinner. I don't want to wait another 69 minutes for somebody to bring out a 2-liter root beer. They're like, no, we'll send somebody right now. They'll bring it. They'll be there. It'll be real fast. They'll get there. I'm like, I don't like this idea. How about you just refund my $3? And they go, sorry, sir, that's against the policy. We can only give you a partial refund.
What's a partial refund for
I didn't
$3?
even ask. I didn't ask how much of my $3 they weren't going to give me back for them forgetting to bring me a thing I'd paid for.
This is indicative of two things. One, that when they make mistakes, it seems like people just must blow it off. And two, there must be a lot of people that are trying to get free stuff out of these fast food restaurants because this whole system...
They have to have a policy like this?
Yeah, the whole system sounds like it's just built to protect company assets and not to serve the customer.
Okay, now I was also thinking about the other driver, because it would be a different driver, and he wasn't the one who screwed up. So can you imagine being a driver and be like, here's a 2-liter, drive 10 miles to take them this 2-liter, and they're not going to tip you. And it's on you. Like,
I'm kind of shrugging over here because I'm like, that's your job. Like, you're at work.
I get it. But you're thinking of it as like sticking it to the company, but I'm also thinking of the individual that has to do this because of the other guy's mistake. It wasn't my mistake. I mean, I shouldn't be taking responsibility for this whole situation like I'm the one who screwed up. Ben, you're being way too compassionate to this corporate black box that treats you like a number instead of a person. I was teetering on the edge of saying, just give me the reduced refund and calling it all off, because it was going to cost me more to tip the second driver than it was to just forget the $3 in the first place. But I was a bit... I had a Ben versus Bureaucracy moment. I'm like, no, I'm going to take on the man here. I'm like, okay, go ahead and send the 2-liter out. And they're like, yeah, it'll be real fast. And they hung up. Never came. Never.
Whoa. Oh, that's it. Burn it down. Molotov cocktail time. It's over.
So I'm sitting there an hour later, didn't show up. I'm looking at the app, nothing. I'm not going to call the store back. So I go on the app and there's like a complaint section. And I tap on it and I fill it in. I tell the whole story. And I'm expecting it'll go to like the regional manager or something like that.
Oh, for crying. No, it's going to go into the circle file. It's going to come out of the printer and fall off the print tray right into the shredder.
So the next day I have an email from like the regional manager.
Okay.
He says that I'm going to use the wrong terminology. Maybe I can find it. But he says that my complaint generated a resolution or something like that, and that I now have a credit with the store. I need to call and ask for a manager, and they will send me a free large pizza and a 2-liter.
Okay, like, I mean,
we're sorry this happened.
How do you feel about this resolution, Ben?
I wish they would acknowledge that it's a crappy policy, or at least make an effort to explain it to me why it was like this. Thank you for taking the time to provide us with your feedback. At Papa John's, we strive for best in class in everything we do. We're sorry we have not met your expectations at your local store. I would like to personally apologize for that experience. We would like to credit a large pizza and a 2-liter. You need to call the store in order to receive it. Just hit 5, speak with the manager, let them know you have a quality guarantee, which will be in our system under your name and phone number.
This just reeks of settling out of court. It's like, what do I got to do to get rid of this guy?
What am I going to sue them for, though? Hot coffee in my lap? Honestly.
All right, if the regional manager, like, this is such a rubber stamp email that you got. And it's like, oh, I'll send this guy a large pizza and a 2-liter, and this Karen will never call me about this again. This is what this reeks of.
I understand that I stumbled into a Maven trap. I did it knowingly.
Man, I don't know.
I was just so dissatisfied with the handling of the local store. I wanted to escalate.
Well, this is the thing. This is about you, and it's like, it's such an endearing quality in you. You give so much faith and so much credit to people that I just want to shake you and like, Ben, that's not how the world works.
All right, we can stop talking about fast food now. I want to ask you about what happened to Daddy's monster truck.
You keep calling it that. Like, you're the last person on earth that has called it that.
I know. Your son used to call that when he was little, and it was so cute. I can't get it out of my head.
Okay, so for the longest time, I had a 4-door F-150 that I ran my entire pool business from start to finish in that truck. I lived in that truck. It treated me very well. But the air conditioner died last month, and I had it fixed for $500. And this is after it had died last year, and I paid $2,000 to have it fixed. And then it died again this week, and they wanted to charge me $1,000 to fix it.
To be fair, Josh, to be an automotive air conditioner in Magic Valley is a very tall order.
Oh, there's no doubt that air conditioner was, like, the truck had 150,000 miles. That air conditioner had 400,000 miles. There's no doubt about that. But it makes it functionally unusable as a vehicle in Arizona for most of the year if you don't have.
You can't have a car without air conditioning.
Yes, not a thing. So finally, it got to the point where I'm now at. Is it worth pouring money into this maintenance?
Good problem? On you for not falling for the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. The guy at the dealership was flabbergasted when he's like, "Oh yeah, we got to fix these things. It's going to be like $890." And I said, "No, that's fine. Just get it ready. I'll come pick it up in a couple hours." He goes, "Well, we can't get it done in a couple hours." I'm like, No. Don't do anything. I don't want it fixed. I'm just going to take it back. Like, what do you mean? Like, you brought it in? I'm like, yeah, I brought it in, but I don't want to pay for it. So I'm just going to go trade it in and get another one. But what do you mean? Like, the guy just couldn't understand that.
Process it.
Yeah. It's like, it took me a couple of minutes to convince him, no, just get it ready. I'm going to take it and I'm going to be gone. It was the weirdest thing. Anyway, and so it all came crashing to a head. And I've mentioned on the podcast before that I thought our next vehicle was going to be an electric vehicle.
Yeah, so the time came sooner than you thought. Did you have time, Josh, to do all the research? Or had you already done it?
So I had done quite a bit of research, Ben, and let me pull up my spreadsheet.
Oh, I can't wait. Why have you not sent me this already?
Well, just like you don't want to say stuff until it's live on the podcast, maybe I was just saving this for when we were together. So anyway, yes, I did do a bunch of research into electric vehicles, and this was a couple of months ago when we first decided that it was coming down the pipes, and we started saving and trying to put money aside for a down payment and that kind of thing. So I started researching, like, what are the ones that are available, what are the ranges, make, model, manufacturer, all that good stuff. And then, all right, Ben's like clenching his fist in like an excited little kid. I have a color-coded spreadsheet where I went through.
Oh my gosh, it's awesome.
Do you want to describe it then?
Yeah. Okay. So you got like 15 vehicles on here. Now, I thought you were only considering exclusively electric vehicles, but you've also got plug-in hybrids on here. So why were you also considering plug-in hybrids?
Because based on the research that I was doing, it would have checked all the boxes anyway. There's no reason to exclude plug-in hybrids. The difference between an electric vehicle is that it's 100% electric, and a plug-in hybrid also has a batteries and electric motors in it. But the batteries are only made to take it a short distance, and like different manufacturers define short in different ways. But the whole thing, like the punchline of that is they're all trying to be like, all right, how far does the average person drive in one day? Let's make the battery big enough just for that. And then if the battery gets low or they're going to go farther, then the gas engine will kick in and just take over.
Okay, I have so many questions. So you don't have any particular kind of brand loyalty? You weren't like leaning towards one brand over another?
In this realm, no, none whatsoever.
Now, you had basically an upper price range, which probably excludes the electric vehicle company that shall not be named.
So there's a couple. There's actually 2 or 3 other electric vehicle manufacturers, along with Tesla, that have very expensive but very fancy electric, like, sports cars. They're for the high-end consumers. Now,
sure.
Ben said Tesla shall not be named because let's go down this rabbit hole for just a second, Ben.
All right. That was why I said that, so we wouldn't go down the rabbit hole. Go ahead.
I don't want to. We're not going down the rabbit hole. I want to be on the record that we saw it coming. We predicted it on the podcast that Tesla came out and said that they are going to charge $200 per month to unlock a piece of software that you own in your vehicle that you've already paid $100,000 for. That is insanity.
All right. You're on the record.
On the record. All right.
Now, I can see here that it looks like you went and sat in 5 of these 12 vehicles.
I sat in more than 5. Anything that's colored, I'd sat in.
Oh, wow.
So
there were some that were absolutely out. No, I think we pointed out before, and if you look at our photos, you'll see that Josh is like a head taller than me. So it's probably a deal breaker for you that if you don't have adequate room, and sometimes that's the case, I assume.
Well, and here's the thing, is all of my initial research pointed me at the Kia Niro as like, that's the one. That's the guy that I want. But then I went out, and my wife had a recall on her car, and there was a Kia dealership like a couple blocks away. So I dropped off her car to get worked on for the recall, and I was like, I'll just take a couple block walk over here and sit in this Kia Niro that I'm planning on buying sometime in the future. And I sat down in it, Ben, and I put the seat all the way to the floor, and the windshield stopped, like at its upper limit, right in the middle of my eye line.
So I like that as a little anecdote for what can go wrong with these kinds of things. Like, you could plan out this decision matrix and see all the numbers and plan it all out and say, like, this is the one for us. It meets all our needs. And then you go sit in it and you're like, okay, this won't do at all.
I sat down and I literally could not see out the windshield. So yeah, that's a problem if it's going to be the car that I drive every day.
Wow. So you have 4 or 5 of these marked with that same comment that you just couldn't see.
Yep.
Being a big guy.
I have a very high sitting height. So not only am I tall, but a lot of that is evenly distributed in my torso. There are guys that are tall that they are taller in their legs. Yeah, exactly. I am not that way. It's all torso. I almost had to fly a different plane in pilot training because I barely fit into the plane that I learned in for the same reason.
I assume Nicole's probably similar to Alicia in that she tends to be shorter. So if we share a vehicle, there has to be a really wide range between what the max and the min is, because she likes seats where the driver's seat is power controlled because they typically can raise up.
This is the first car that we own that has not only is it a power seat, but it has the memory functions, which is going to be super useful because whenever Nicole or I swap as the driver, we've got to change everything.
Right. So one of our cars has that, and the way it works is there's 2 key fobs, and it knows which is which. So whichever key fob you open it with, it moves the driver position in the mirrors.
Nice. Well, anyway, as you can see from my spreadsheet, there was only like 2 or 3 vehicles that came out of this that were acceptable. One of them is a plug-in hybrid. I decided after a while that wasn't going to work just for this one reason. I didn't want to have a vehicle that had 2 separate powertrains that I had to worry about maintenance for.
Yeah, that's understandable.
So it came down to the Hyundai Kona or the Volkswagen ID.4. There are 2 reasons that I decided to go with the Volkswagen ID.4. Spoilers, everybody. I bought a Volkswagen ID.4 today.
Yeah, I'd never even heard of that until you told me today.
Okay. Well, 2 reasons. First of all, the ID.4 was engineered by Volkswagen from the ground up as being an electric vehicle from the start. So every consideration, everything that they did from the inception of the vehicle to the development was intended to be an electric vehicle. Whereas the Hyundai Kona is basically an electric retrofit of a small SUV that they sell in the gas-powered and a plug-in hybrid version as well.
Okay. Why is it more efficient than the ID.4 then? You've got the MPGe column.
Yes. I don't know why. Engineering, I don't know. I couldn't tell you the specifics of all this stuff. I just see those were the numbers.
Are you familiar with the Volkswagen diesel controversy?
I've heard of this. Like I had friends that actually had
big freaking deal.
That they were basically flubbing their emissions numbers on those.
Yeah, in the coolest way possible.
And how what's the coolest way possible? It sounds like you want to talk about that.
Yeah, okay, so a diesel engine is a very efficient way to get a lot of energy out of a very small amount of fuel, but unfortunately, when you combust it the most efficient way, it also tends to pollute a little more than if you combust it slightly differently. And so diesel engine manufacturers have this weird tension they have to fit in between creating an efficient vehicle, which is what consumers want, and creating a low pollution vehicle, which is what the government requires. And the engineers are probably sitting around being like, the only time this even matters is when we get tested for emissions. And you're like, well, here's what the emissions test does. You put it on this machine and they always do the exact same thing. They're like, what do you mean always do the exact same thing? They're like, it always follows this exact pattern. They're like, well, what we could do is we could program the vehicle's computer to detect when it's getting a vehicle emissions inspection and run it the way that's less efficient but better emissions wise.
That's awesome.
And so some engineer that worked for the government basically suspected that this was happening, and he developed this rig that would conduct the same type of test but on the road, and it gave completely different results.
Oh,
and
wow.
he was so baffled by it that he like opened it up to the whole community, and it took years for people to even believe that Volkswagen had gone this far.
That's super cool.
Yeah. And so they embedded it into their code, and they finally found out, and I think the CEO resigned. I mean, it was huge.
Huh. Well,
but they were basically doing what they could to give you a more efficient vehicle, even though it wasn't meeting government emission standards.
Well, good on them for thinking about the consumer instead of the government.
And the government.
I can say with some level of confidence that the vehicle I purchased today will pass any emissions test that you give it.
100% battery-powered Volkswagen designed to be electric from the ground up. I'd never heard of the ID4. I can't wait to see it.
There was a second reason that I bought it over the Hyundai. Would you like to know why?
Yeah.
The Hyundai Kona is electric. The full EV is only sold in certain states that have specific tax breaks for it. Arizona is not one of those states. I literally could not buy that vehicle in this state.
Oh. Okay.
I theoretically...
Then how did you sit in one?
Oh, I sat in the gas version.
Oh. Okay, and you just took that as an analog for does it fit?
Exactly, because all the headroom, all the stats and everything for interior design, all that stuff is identical. It's just the
I'm
powertrain.
surprised at the price on the Volkswagen. My personal understanding of Volkswagens is that they tend to have a price premium that makes them more expensive than similar models.
The price on my spreadsheet here is lower. That's the base model.
Oh, okay. So you got one with a few options on it.
I got a couple of good options on it. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. Well, I will follow up with you on this in the future to find out how it's going owning an electric vehicle. That's cool.
I have no way of fueling it up right now, so that's fun. We're going to install the level 2 charger in my house tomorrow. We have to rip open my power box to do so and run a new circuit, and that's going to be a lot of fun and interesting little project to do on a weekend. But in the meantime, it does come. It's such a joke. It comes with a charger that you can plug into a normal 110 volt outlet, just any outlet in your house.
Yeah, and what, it takes like 24 hours to charge or something?
80. It takes 80 hours to get a full charge on that one. So if you're going to get an electric vehicle, you have to bake in like $1,000 to get a charger put into your house.
Okay. And you're going to install it yourself?
Of course, because I know how to do that.
Okay. Good on you. All right. Now, because we've been moving into our new house in Louisiana this week, we're going through all those things that you do when you move. You know, you'd mentioned like the 2-week period of just not caring about what you're eating.
Yep.
There's also like this thing that always happens when you're married to someone, and that is you find a million different ways that you disagree on things.
Oh.
Because there's so much happening so fast.
Yes, it's a high stress situation. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made in a short span of time. It's a perfect like catalyst for just marital strife.
Yeah, people used to say the perfect catalyst for marital strife was wallpapering a room, but no one even wallpapers rooms anymore. This is it. It's moving.
I've heard remodeling a kitchen can be the same kind of experience.
Yeah. Who gets what bedroom? Where do we put the TV? Which dresser goes where? Should we get rid of this? Should we buy a new one of these? Just what wall should we hang this painting on? And over and over and over, just a million different ways. What I've found is that my personality is I just don't like the chaos, and I have opinions on the decisions. But also, if I disappeared for a week and came back and somebody had made all the decisions, I probably wouldn't second guess them.
Oh,
But there's a few.
so if somebody did all the work for you, you'd be fine with that, is what you're saying.
Right. So usually what happens in the past is Alicia detects this friction over things that she realizes probably don't matter that much, but there's just friction happening. And she'll do something like, hey, could you go outside and set up the trampoline?
Hey, you are dismissed for 20 minutes.
And so I'll just end up in the yard, and I'll be fixing up the landscaping and unpacking the garage. And I'll come inside and she's, unpack the kitchen. And then if I don't like the knife drawer, I can move it, but I'll probably just deal with where it is.
Which, yeah, why would you care where the knife drawer was?
But here in Louisiana, it's the middle of July. It's 90 degrees out and 90% humidity, and it's 20 degrees hotter than that in the garage, and I'm not doing anything outside. It would be dangerous. So we've just been stuck in the house, and there's been a lot of that friction. We're making progress though. We're nearing the end.
Yeah, I can see you. Like, you're in a room right now where all the furniture is in a place that looks like it might stay there for a while, but you can tell you're moving because there's nothing on the walls. And every horizontal surface is covered in stuff.
You got it. That's a great way to describe it. That's what our whole house looks like right now. Nothing on the walls. Every horizontal surface is covered in stuff.
Nice.
Now, another thing that happens when you move in the military, and that's another way of relieving the friction, is on Monday I started work. Like, I didn't have anything that I would say, I can't come into the office today. That was all behind me. I turned in the U-Haul and I'd given back the pod and everything. The utilities were connected. I just didn't have any excuse not to go into work. So then I'll get up first thing in the morning. I'll be gone all day and I'll come home and she'll have done whatever. Yeah. And then I can just help out.
Yeah. You're at that stage of moving now where everything is physically in the house and you just have to vibrate the whole structure for long enough until everything settles into where it's supposed to go.
Yeah, that's a great mental image. That's exactly what's going on. So one of the things you have to do when you're new to a military installation is you have to conduct what's called in-processing. And we talked about this, I think 2 or 3 episodes ago, where I told you I was going through out-processing at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. And basically the idea is that there's 40 different people on the base that all want to approve before you leave because they have a stake in your departure.
And now the fun part is the exact opposite is happening. Except where everybody cared that you were leaving, nobody cares that you showed up. It's like, wait, who are you again? Why are you in my office?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not the same group of people. There's a whole host of social services on base that exist to help people, but not really. They're not funded by how many people they help. They're just funded by the government. So they use opportunities like this to force you to come in a room and listen to their sales pitch.
Okay. Which organizations are you talking about?
Like the psychological counseling unit, the marital therapy unit, the guys that can give you an interest-free loan if you're behind on your bills.
Okay, hang on
chaplain,
a second.
The medical group.
I'm going to throw a time out here because you you pitched that it's a bunch of companies that are just trying to gouge you for
Not
money.
Companies.
No, these are legitimate services that are essential to keeping a mentally healthy and robust fighting force that you just kind of skipped over. Marital counseling, nobody cares about that. Mental health, that's not an issue anybody has to deal with.
Well, one of the ones that gave us their talk, including the inspector general, who's like, here's who you come to if you want to report on your boss or be a whistleblower or whatever. This one was the EO office, Equal Opportunity. So there's an office on base. It usually has, 3 people in it. That is the singular function you can go to if you want to report some type of violation of equal opportunity. Gender discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination, racial discrimination, those kinds of things.
Okay.
So imagine this ballroom that could be used for a ball, filled up with people in military uniforms and a few scattered civilians. And then you got this military member up at the front who's saying, hey, I'm from the office where you can come to report these kinds of things. And then she starts rattling off examples. And it had been a while since I'd been through one of these briefings, and some of the examples that she gave kind of blew my mind that the world is changing. Like, for instance, she gave an example of one that they'd investigated and taken action on, where there was an office where I think there was 1 man and 4 women in the office, and they were giving him all the carry heavy things tasks.
Okay. Yeah, that's gender discrimination.
it is gender discrimination, and I was surprised by it that they actually substantiated it and took action based on it.
I mean, it's a brave new world, Ben. Like,
Yeah.
So you're pro EO. It sounds like.
I mean, yes. Well, yes, Josh. I don't hate nuclear surety. Of course, I'm not in favor of discrimination in any form. But here's the point. Here's the story I wanted to tell. So she's got this room full of 100 people that she's talking to, and I think in the past, people have given the surveys and like this briefing's boring. It should be more interactive. So she decides she wants to interact with the crowd. Now imagine this person whose job is to find that you've said or done something politically incorrect, and now she's quizzing us in front of all our peers of various ranks and persuasions and agencies on base that they're going to belong to. And she's like, "What do you think about if your coworker said this?" So she gives an example where she's like, what if you're sitting there and your supervisor says to the NCO, "Come on, B, let's go get some lunch."
And she said the B word.
No, she did not say the B word. She said, "Come on, B, let's go get some lunch."
Is the person's name start with B? That would be my first question.
She didn't tell us that. Then she turns to some poor airman and volunteers him.
Is that okay? Yes or no? There's
Yes.
only one right answer.
And he said the truth instead of the one right answer. And he's like, "That sounds fine to me."
Ooh, and then she just eviscerated him.
She did just like you did. She goes, "Ooh, that's the wrong answer. It is not okay to say, 'Come on, B, let's go get some lunch.'" And then everybody's kind of scratching their head, and somebody looks at her, and like somebody that outranks the guy that just answered, and like, I don't see what the problem with that is. I'm over there on my phone, like looking up on Urban Dictionary. What's the problem with calling something B? I'm trying to figure out if it's spelled BEE or BEA.
It's short for a curse word, Ben.
So she it doesn't even dawn on her. Somebody finally interrupts her and like, "Do you mean bitch?"
So she didn't say the curse word, so somebody else had to.
Yes. And I realized, how can you be in that kind of office and even function if you can't be clear about what it is you're trying to say? Like, how is she supposed to have an interactive discussion about telling us what is or isn't appropriate to say if she's like a school teacher that wants to tell you not to say swear words but won't repeat them?
So this is, I've been enjoying this very much because I don't know if you know this, Ben, but my wife was the wing equal opportunity officer like a couple of different times.
I know Nicole wouldn't have handled it like this. I know she wouldn't have. It was really awkward.
I'm sure. I'm sure Nicole would have handled it much better than this person putting a poor airman on the spot with an ambiguous question. But yeah. I have to say that I'm a little disappointed. I was waiting for you to hang yourself with that so I could like drop the hammer and like, "No, Ben, my wife's an EO, and let me tell you the real story." But no, you have a legitimate like complaint of somebody that told a story poorly. So now I'm disappointed.
Anyway, yeah, I'm grateful there's agencies and stuff like that on base. But honestly, if you're going to be in that office, clarity is paramount.
You're aware of 30 Rock, yes? You're aware of everything on TV.
Yes, go.
There was one episode where they had the censor, like the network censor, the guy that's in charge of bleeping out all the swear words. Uh-huh. And he was walking around dealing with things on their show. And he swore like a sailor. They had to bleep out, like on the show, half of what he said. Everybody's looking at him like, "Aren't you the censor?" He's like, "Yeah. Who's going to censor me? Nobody's going to censor me. I'm the censor." And then started swearing again.
Okay.
That's how it should be.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine that. I'll have to watch a clip and find it and put it in the show notes. All right, I got one other question for you before we do our regular segments.
Okay.
I understand that you had been waiting to make one last modification to your computer. So for those people that care about Josh's computer, just give us the quick on that one.
I don't know if waiting is a good term. This one was contentious, this upgrade, Ben, because I was on one of my favorite websites, Woot, WOOT.com, and they have deals every day, and they're constantly cycling, and it's usually refurbished stuff or things that big retailers are trying to move that are waiting on stock sales or whatever.
Woot.com, if you're listening, you can sponsor the podcast.
Yeah, Woot.com, seriously, sponsor. Hardcore. Anyway, it came up on their site that they had a 240 millimeter all-in-one CPU cooler for an outstanding price. And I stared at that thing for probably 23 straight hours, Ben. Just like, I could totally click this. This is the last thing I need. Because I have been rocking a $30 Cooler Master Hyper 212, which is a great budget air cooler. But
for your processor?
Yes, for my processor in my computer.
So you just had a big, bulky air cooler that supposedly was carrying away enough heat that your case fans could disperse the heat. But you have your case stuck into like this hole where it doesn't get good airflow.
Right, lots of reasons. There's reasons for this, right? Nicole, are you listening? Ben understands. This is why I need this. Here's the problem. I'm like, oh, I had it on the screen, and she's like, what are you looking at? I'm like, oh, this thing's this great sale, and I think I can totally get this to fit. And I had made a little cardboard mock-up of how big it was to make sure it would fit in my tiny case.
That's amazing.
And then she goes...
Okay, I'm imagining you like Dr. Emmett Brown. I'm sorry, Marty, this is so crude. It's not to scale, but it's the best I could do with the time I had.
Basically. Well, so I've got a really small case because it fits in that little cubby you were talking about. So I had to make sure this thing would physically fit into the case with all the other stuff that's in there. So I'm doing my due diligence, and Nicole's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just making sure this thing will fit in the case. And she goes... And it was one of those moments where I realized something was wrong, and there was this pause, and she goes... I thought the video card was the last thing you needed.
Oh, you'd already used the word last.
And I was like, well, I mean, that's... Okay. I tried to explain that was the last critical component that I needed, but this one is solving a problem that I have, and it's not that big of a deal, right?
All right, you used me against your wife a minute ago, but I'm going to speak up in her favor here. In favor of embattered wives everywhere who have one more last thing. It does feel like it's never going to end.
I mean, it does, but like I can say with some degree of confidence that this was the last thing.
Yeah, but okay, but like the fact that you had to get a cardboard cutout, I mean, this took some doing. You had to like take everything out and like cut holes in the case again.
I did, yeah. When I did, so the punchline of the story, spoilers, Ben, I did buy the thing. It showed up and it's great and I love it to death. But I did have to strip everything out of the case. I had to cut a bigger hole for the radiator to fit in the top, put everything back in, and then I had to move the power supply to a different spot, but not too far because then it would interfere with the graphics card. Like, it took a whole day to just put this one new component in. But since then,
You liked it.
Oh, I loved every second, of course, man.
You texted me the whole time. You're like, this is great. Look at this.
Well, I normally do that kind of stuff to my spouse, but she was not so keen on the all-in-one cooler, so I wasn't big on like interrupting her doing her homework at every step.
When you say all-in-one, does that mean it was self-contained? Like you didn't have to like pour water into it?
Oh yes, this is a closed-loop cooler is what they call them in the industry.
Yeah.
It comes in one piece. It's like a little block that gets screwed onto the motherboard that contacts the CPU. There's two hoses that come off it that connect to a radiator, and then it comes with usually two fans and all the mounting hardware. So you don't have to plumb anything. You don't have to fill it with any special liquids or make sure the pump is primed. It's all already taken care of. You just install it.
Yeah, I've watched way too many horrifying Linus Tech Tip videos where like they turn it on and they get a leak and there's water running across the motherboard.
Yes, not a problem.
Or they're frantically trying to turn it off.
Yeah, I'm not to the level of custom water cooling. That seems a bridge too far for me, especially because I did price it for the system that I have here, and it would have been like $500 or $600. No way that one's meeting the requisitions approval of the spouse.
Of the chief requisitions officer. Okay, so was it worth it? Did it work?
So, like you mentioned, my computer lives in a tiny little cubby that I had to make for it. And since I installed this cooler, the CPU on average is running 20 degrees cooler Celsius. So I don't even.
How is that even possible?
I don't even know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's a lot of Fahrenheit.
I think it's just like times 7 divided by 5. So 20 times 7 divided by 5 is 28 degrees.
So there you go. I mean, that's a significant difference for the longevity and just the functionality of my PC. Plus, the fans are running at a slower speed, so it's much quieter. It's just nicer to be down in there like that. It's the difference is that this is a cooler that's intended to cool something that's generating a ton of heat, and it's well engineered and well designed, whereas the other air cooler I had was a $30 thing that was good enough at the time.
Yeah. All right. Well, all's well that ends well.
More fun computer stuff. For some reason...
Or did you have to draw too deeply from the bank of spousal goodwill, and now you're in debt?
That's... well, the funny thing, I don't call it a bank. I think of it as a well. Like, the last bucket that I pulled up from the spouse approval well was a little muddy. So that means I just need to wait longer and let the well fill back up with some clear water again.
Okay. I like that. Yeah, because otherwise how could you make a withdrawal when it's empty? But you can make a muddy withdrawal if you need to.
Yeah.
I always hate, Josh, I hate when I show up to a new unit and I haven't had a chance to just get a minute to prove myself to the new office and people before I need to like go on emergency leave because I had a death in the family. It just looks like I'm unreliable.
Ben, what are they going to do? Force you to retire? Move you to Louisiana?
Make me move to Louisiana?
Like, you have the easiest job in the world because there is nothing they can do to you. Like, you should show up every day in sunglasses and throw your feet up on the table.
I'm not talking about this specific situation. I'm talking about my personal ethics.
Okay.
I always like to have a chance to make a few deposits before I have to start making withdrawals, but sometimes life doesn't let that happen. Sometimes life circumstances happen in reverse, and you have to make withdrawals right away in a relationship that's going to be an extended relationship before you have a chance to make deposits.
Now, I'll tell you what, if only the military had all these institutions to help people in these difficult situations.
I don't know what they are. I wasn't paying attention. I was playing games on my phone while they were telling me what they do.
Shame on you. Terrible.
It is time for Bad at Logic, and I think this week you are picking a bias.
I'm always biased, and apparently I like all these biases. I'm just gonna embrace it. I have all these biases, and I'm okay with it. So this time, Ben, this is actually one that I have been aware of for a long time, and I like to point it out and explain it to other people. I didn't have these words, but I really like how they capture it here. This is called the self-serving bias. And what that is, when you fail, when something bad happens, that's because of external things outside of the scope of your control, outside of your agency. But when good stuff happens, well, buddy, that's because you've been just working your fingers to the bone and you're just so great and amazing. I have probably explained this phenomenon on this podcast before in a different way. When bad stuff happens, people like to externalize it. They don't want to reflect on what decisions did I make? How could I have done better in these circumstances? Because then that means that there's something wrong with them, which then damages or hurts their ego. And your brain has been evolved to avoid all forms of pain, physical and emotional. So rather than do that introspection, it's much easier and much safer to find something outside of us to blame. Oh, it's them. It's that guy, or it's these circumstances that I had no part in. And this happens, I know you want to talk, but I'm stopping you here. This happens at a larger scale, too. This happens at the nation-state level whenever you hear these politicians that get up and start like, well, we could take a hard look at our own internal like socioeconomic developments in the last 10 years, or we could blame everybody south of the border. It is their fault.
Yeah, no argument there. The point I was just going to make is this is another one of the situations, and I think the context this came up in the past on this podcast is in the game of Magic. You know, I see people that reach a maximum success level in Magic. You know, as you start playing and you try to, do well at your local tournaments or do well at regional tournaments or stuff like that, you'll see people who are otherwise smart and successful people with a high degree of capability who will run into their ceiling, and it's usually because of this bias.
Yes. I reached my maximum professional capacity in the military because of this bias.
Everything bad that happens is someone else's fault, and everything good that happens is my fault.
Yes. I was incapable until I was in my mid-30s of accepting the fact that maybe it was me. Maybe I was making bad decisions. Maybe there was things I could have done differently to prevent these things from happening. And I feel like once I recognized that, I reached a level of emotional maturity that I had never experienced before. And I feel like a completely different person having recognized this within myself.
Yeah, well, that's why it's good that we talk about these so we can examine them in ourselves.
I will tell you from experience, people, The hardest thing you can do is look inward when something bad happens and find the fault with yourself. But you will be a better person for it. It will suck, and you will be stressed out, and you will be mad at yourself, but you will learn and you will grow and you will be better next time.
Well said. So for Bad English this week, I want to share a phrase I frequently heard used in the UK that I don't feel like we have a good equivalent of in the US. And this was some of the ones I give on this show are a bit obscure and maybe only a few people used them or you wouldn't hear them very often. But this one I heard almost daily. And the British use this phrase, done and dusted. Have you heard that one before?
I have not. I say the phrase done and done. Am I saying it? Should I be saying done and dusted?
Yeah, it means the same thing, although I don't know that I've heard it said. But it's just this phrase with the meaning of a great deal of finality. Like, come to me when it's done and dusted. Like, not just you think you've finished it, but you're sure you've finished it and it's all closed up.
Signed, sealed, delivered.
Yeah, that's a good equivalent of it, yes. And I think signed, sealed, delivered actually is the exact same meaning. Not just a similar meaning, but the exact same meaning. Because done and dusted is actually referring to the time when people used to write letters from an inkwell where the ink was like iron gall ink or something like that, and it would still be wet, and you couldn't fold it and put it into the envelope until it dried. And so sometimes they would sprinkle some powder on it to force the ink to dry faster.
Very cool. So, yeah, exactly the same thing.
Yeah, signed, sealed, delivered, done and dusted. Completely finished.
Well, okay. Brits, I got to give you this one. This is fewer syllables than what I would normally say. So, done and dusted.
So we teased a few weeks ago that we had that we were going to review the book The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I had given good advance warning, and I know I've heard back from several of our listeners saying that they've been reading the book along with us. So if you read the Hobbit or you're going to read the Hobbit, let's dive in.
Excellent. Ben, we're going to do the standard Bad at Magic thing whenever we review pop culture-y stuff. Ben's probably going to dive into some of the meta things that happened outside in the production, I'm assuming, because he normally does that. Yes. And then I'm going to dive into a lot of the weird story things that happened, because those are the kinds of people we are. So, Ben, this is one that I really want you to go first, because I have a very strong hypothesis and a theme for this book that I want to just really drive home, and I want to make sure we get all the serious stuff out of the way first.
All right, so you haven't seen my notes, so you don't know what I'm going to talk about.
I have no idea.
Now, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien was published in 1937, a full 17 years before Fellowship of the Ring.
Wow.
And it kind of shows. It was based on bedtime stories he used to tell his children. And it was kind of drawing upon lots of other fantastical as in like fantasy properties, other influences. J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, those kinds of things of just magical races and things. And he became, through this and through the Lord of the Rings, what they call the father of high fantasy.
Yes.
So he wrote this while he was studying to be a professor of linguistics and literature at Oxford University in England. And he was studying like Anglo-Saxon, so he's reading like Beowulf and those kinds of things. And in Beowulf, one of the main characters is like this giant dragon. So it's not even that different from Beowulf, this telling of the Hobbit where Bilbo goes on an adventure and takes on a giant murderous dragon.
Oh, spoilers.
But this happened shortly after he returned as a veteran from World War I. And if you keep that in mind as you're reading this and thinking about him as having fought in trench warfare in France, it really makes a lot of sense. So he signed up at age 24 in 1916, so about 11 years before he wrote the book. He left for France to go fight in World War I, like right at the beginning of World War I. He became a comm officer.
Oh. Cool. Back when they needed to like wave flags at people to get their attention and things.
Yeah. So he was in the army, became a comm officer, and he was doing the hurry up and wait thing. Like they were staging and prepping and stuff like that. However bad it is now, I'm sure it was profoundly worse then. And he was just bored out of his gourd with nothing to do. So he started writing.
Coal. And he's writing high fantasy, apparently.
Yeah, so the genesis of him becoming a writer was just him being a lieutenant in the forces and being bored. So he started writing these stories, inspired by other things that he'd read. When he returned, there's a lot about his military service. I mean, he was profoundly affected by the reality of World War I. You know, just the utter senselessness of the violence, the horrible impact it had to the countryside, you know, just scarring of the shelling and the trenches and the mud and the muck. And he contracted a disease called trench fever that was transmitted by the hordes of lice. So he was infected with lice and he got trench fever and it left him emaciated. And he eventually got sent home because of it. And he was demobilized 3 years after he joined the service on a disability pension. But while he was in, he ended up commanding a group of enlisted blue-collar guys from Lancashire who he admired. They were like miners that worked down in the earth.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and he really admired them. He says he felt inadequate to inspire their love and loyalty. The most improper job of any man is bossing other men. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity. So he kind of had this perspective toward leadership, fought in the trenches, admired these miners who worked down in the earth. And he got sent to Oxford. He was studying language and Beowulf and all these kinds of things. And then he bumped into a guy named C.S. Lewis.
Oh, I've heard that name before.
They belonged to a club of writers at Oxford University they called the Inklings.
That sounds familiar too.
There's like 3 or 4 of them that are also famous, and they've all written a bunch of stuff. But of course, you've heard of the name C.S. Lewis because he's the author of the Chronicles of Narnia.
Hey, I don't want to interrupt you, but were all of them 2-1 white and black flyers? This club of Inklings?
The Inklings? Yeah. Good magic joke. Well done. I don't know if that's related because it's spelled the same. Anyway, at the time, J.R.R. Tolkien. Do you know what J.R.R. stands for, by the way?
I don't.
It is John Ronald Reuel, or Reuel. He was born in 1892 and lived to the age of 81. Anyway, he met C.S. Lewis, and J.R.R. Tolkien was a devout Catholic. Now, he had a personal philosophy where he believed that though he was doing this writing, that he didn't want to directly evangelize his faith in his writing. So it's kind of subtle in all of his stories that he wrote. C.S. Lewis, on the other hand, if you're familiar with anything that he wrote, but what you don't know is that when C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien met, C.S. Lewis was an avowed atheist. He didn't believe in Christ at all.
Okay.
And he was converted, I kid you not, by J.R.R. Tolkien.
That's... you're talking to like an agnostic atheist over here. So, like, if you're waiting for a big explosion of reaction,
if you go back to about the year 1935, these two had been friends for about a dozen years. They were both comm officers in the military in a time of war.
Oh, geez.
One was an atheist and one was a Christian.
Okay, I'm starting to see it now. No, Ben, we're not going to play this back out. We've been down this road. Stop it.
So then, J.R.R. Tolkien converts C.S. Lewis to Christianity, and he becomes such an ardent Christian, but he doesn't convert to Catholicism like J.R.R. Tolkien was. He converts to the Church of England, Anglican, and their friendship started to deviate after that.
Yeah, well, anyway, Catholics and the Church of England, there's a history there.
C.S. Lewis wrote books like Bedknobs and Broomsticks, where the character Aslan is not even a thinly veiled type of Christ.
Oh, no. I think
it's
like a couple of spelling errors, and it could be the New Testament.
Right. So it's and J.R.R. Tolkien hated it. He didn't like it at all. So when they would critique each other's writing, you can see things where J.R.R. Tolkien said about Lewis's writings. He's like, it sucks. And Lewis, on the other hand, saw J.R.R. Tolkien's writing, and they were editing each other's stuff. And he's like, this is brilliant. It's awesome.
They're both very successful writers. So apparently Tolkien was the one that was in the wrong here.
But Lewis was a prolific writer who produced tons and tons of stuff, and Tolkien was a bit more sparing. You know, he did a lot of like studying and he was developing like whole languages and backstories for everything that just were the foundation, and then he would write the book about it.
Well, and that's kind of common. If you look at different books, especially in the fiction genre, there's like two types of authors. There is the author that has like a whole shelf at the bookstore of these like serial novels that they just kind of like churn out on an assembly line. And then there's the people like Tolkien. There's the people like the Harry Potter person that I can't not remember her name to save my life. The
J.K. Rowling.
Thank you. I always do that to you. But there's the kind of writers that churn out like a very few number of works, but they're always masterpieces.
Yes. So here you have, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, you have the young prodigy and the old master as friends. You know, you have Lewis just churning out thing after thing. He's publishing in magazines and newspapers, and he's writing book after book after book, and Tolkien writes one book. And
is the king or the creator of high fantasy.
Now, it's interesting because if you look at this from the perspective of him being a serious academic, this wasn't necessarily a respected thing. Like, he wasn't there as a professor of fiction. He was there as like a professor of linguistics and serious literature and those kinds of things. And then he was writing these fantastical stories about dragons and elves and stuff. And this wasn't commonly accepted thing at the time.
Well, to be fair, it is well known that Tolkien created an entirely unique language that is Elvish for these books.
So there was a little bit of academic rigor going on behind the scenes that was legitimate, but otherwise it just looked like he was a serious professor who liked to tell children's bedtime stories.
Which, I mean, if you're a parent, of course, no parent on earth has not had to come up with a bedtime story on the fly.
So, yeah, I mean, you got German fairy tales, Snow White, the Brothers Grimm, that kind of influenced. You can match these things up with stuff in The Hobbit. So let's get to it. So go ahead and give us the plot synopsis.
Okay, so I read The Hobbit originally when I was in middle school or just beginning high school, and I remember like really, really enjoying it, just like the high fantasy and the different situations and things, and it was great. And I hadn't read it since then. And since then, Ben, I think I've developed more of a discerning palate when it comes to fiction, because listening back to it, and I read it on Audible, so it was read to me. And
now, there's several versions on Audible. Which did you pick?
I picked the same one that you did. I don't remember the name of the
Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis,
the actor that plays Gollum in The Lord of the Rings.
Yes, and he did an excellent job, because he
sure did.
I mean, there's several different races that have very different sounding voices that he did an excellent job doing. There are many, many songs that are in The Hobbit that he sang very well. I mean, it was a very good version of The Hobbit to listen to. But that said, listening back to it now with this more discerning palate I have for fiction, it was a very different story. Not that it was any less enjoyable, but it was very different. And so here is...
Did you have a bad experience with it?
I wouldn't say it was a bad experience, but it wasn't the same kind of... I wouldn't put it on the shelf next to the Fellowship of the Ring, let's say.
I agree. So, and I noticed you weren't aware of the fact that there was 13 years between those two and him becoming a doctorate in linguistics.
I knew there was some separation in time. I didn't know it was that drastic.
Yeah, so it was just like, this is like when he sat down and wrote out the stories he used to tell his children that kind of harkened to all these things he was reading. And then 13 years later, he turned it into something truly monumental.
So I'm going to give a quick plot synopsis. And that is, the book opens with Bilbo, our protagonist, who is in his lovely home, just chilling, living the bachelor life. We don't know why he's rich, but he is. He has everything that he needs, and he's just loving being alone and hanging out. And then, out of nowhere, a wizard and 13 dwarves show up and crash his house and just like roll in and start eating all of his food.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, and
it's played for humor, and it is quite funny.
It's very well done. But it's basically, oh, we're going on an adventure to go steal treasure from a dragon, and you're coming with us. Wait, what?
We need somebody who's smaller than us and quick. We need a burglar.
Yeah, and it basically came down to, well, what are you, chicken? Well, no, I'm not chicken. And then he went with them to go steal the dragon's treasure.
It was the Marty McFly plot twist.
It's exactly what it was. And then the rest of the book is kind of these weird vignettes of snatches of the adventure. Like, it is all woven together. I'm calling it vignettes because that's how it felt, and I will get to that in a minute. But it's the story of their trip from Bilbo's house to the mountain where the dragon is with his treasure, and how they overcame adversity the whole way, and how they defeated the dragon and claimed the dwarves' birthright back, and Bilbo then returned with his share of the loot, happier and more enriched and a better person for it.
Yeah.
Now, as I was listening to this, it jumped out of the text for me that this honestly really felt like I was listening to a playback of a really good Dungeons and Dragons campaign that had been run and played. And I'll tell you why. Like, there's so many great similarities. If you look at the main characters, we have Gandalf, who is our hardcore veteran. Like, oh, let me bring my character from this other campaign. He's super high level. He's got a great backstory, and I've got all the skills that we need for this thing. Great.
He's a wizard.
He's the wizard. He's got all the knowledge. He knows everything. And he handily gets out of every situation that he ever finds himself in this book. Then we've got Bilbo, he's decided that he's going to do a low-level character, but he's a very strong role player. He's got all these great lines, and he's very into like his character's backstory. And like, well, no, I'm the timid like person that's kind of coming out of my shell, and you can see his growth as a protagonist through the story, and the player is playing it just so well. And then you've got 13 total newbies that have never played Dungeons and Dragons before ever. And they show up to the first session, and the dungeon master's like, wait, all 13 of you are dwarf fighters? Seriously? And like your names rhyme?
What kind of party is this?
Like,
don't you know anything about party constitution?
It's like, well, yeah, well, I mean, this guy had an idea for a dwarf fighter, and we thought that sounded cool, so we're all dwarf fighters. And we're following him. And like, it's just,
I don't know. There was a little bit of variance in the dwarves.
Don't you tell me there was any variance, because we didn't, like, they said the names of all of them like 3 times, but functionally for the entire story, there was only 3 dwarves. There was,
okay, but story-wise, there was only 3 that were actually direct claimants of the throne. Then there was another 4 that were cousins of them. There were 2 that were remote kinsmen of them, and then another 4 that were not of the House of Durin at all. And those groups all played different musical instruments.
Okay. I understand, and I read it too, but at
one
the
guy's
same
the
time,
guy that starts the fires. One guy's the guy that likes to eat. I don't know.
Yeah, there was 13 dwarves in total, but reading it, like, that could have been replaced with 3 dwarves, and it functionally would not have been any different. There was the dwarf noble, there was his every other dwarf that was interchangeable, and the fat one. That was it. Those were the 3 dwarves.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to rattle off their names just for the sake of it. So there was Thorin, who's important, and we'll come back to him.
Thorin is
he was
important.
The leader.
Yes, he's the one of the dwarves.
Then there's Philly and Killy, who are his sister's kids, so they're like his nephews. Then there's Balin and Dwalin, Owen and Glowin, and they're his cousins. Then there's some remote kinsmen, Dori, Nori, and Ori, and they're grouped by the rhyming of their names, which I like. It felt like a kind of a flavor of the dwarf culture. Then there's Biffer and Bomber, and Bomber's the fat one.
Yeah, Bomber.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Functionally, there was Thorin, Bomba, and every other dwarf. It didn't matter what the name was, because it didn't matter.
Now, in the films, which we haven't mentioned yet, but they did make an effort to distinguish amongst the dwarves a little more.
Then they took one book that was only 10 hours long and stretched it into 3. Like, there is more time in movies than it took to read the book.
There's more content in the movies than there are in the books, yes, I know.
Yeah, the movies are terrible. I'm not going to say that. The movies are entertaining, but they are not the book. They are different things.
Yeah.
But this is not where the analogy stops. This entire book was the Dungeons and Dragons campaign being read back to us. And it just, if every time it felt like there was something important that happened, and it was so super well described, And then there was like a session break. Like, okay, well, we're done for today. We'll come back in a couple weeks and do it again. Because it's like, oh, we have this super elaborate, detailed scene where they saw some lights in the distance and then they snuck up on it and it was these 3 trolls and they had this great interaction. It's like, okay, you're the thief.
Doesn't this just sound like a bedtime story of a dad talking to his kids?
Let me tell my story, will you?
All right, go ahead.
All right, so it's like, okay, you're the sneaky one. You go sneak up on the trolls. And he sneaks up on the trolls. He's like, all right, I sneak up on the trolls. All right, roll stealth. Okay, great. Yeah, you see the trolls. This is what happens. And he explains it really well. Like, okay, I'm going to pick their pocket. Why? Because I'm the thief. You don't have to pick their pocket. All right, whatever. Roll pickpocketing. I rolled a 2. Okay, well, you are captured. Wait, he's captured? We charged the trolls. Okay, all of you roll dexterity checks. What do you mean you all failed your dexterity checks? Okay, everybody's captured by the trolls. Now what happens?
The wizard has to come
Gandalf
help.
shows up and kills all of the trolls, no problem, by just stalling for time. Like, the great role player and the wizard stalled for enough time and the trolls died somehow, and you all live to see another day. Okay, listen, y'all can't do that again. You've got to take this more seriously. Okay, let's move on and try again. And then, like, that was a super detailed scene in the book about how all that happened. And then we get this long rest where it's like, oh, and then they arrived in this magical kingdom of the elves and stayed there for 2 weeks and then left. And that's how long it is in the book.
Yeah.
Rivendell. Everybody has seen Rivendell in the movies. It is this amazing place. And they stayed there for 2 weeks. And they skip over it in like a paragraph in the book.
Yeah. So I think he realized that later on when he goes back to Rivendell in Fellowship of the Ring and really describes it, and then that becomes what we know about it, and we kind of transplant that back into our knowledge of The Hobbit. Now, I have like 5 things I want to say about this, but I want to talk about your little D&D vignette there. It was great. Well done. I love that you compared what happened with that scene with the trolls to a little D&D interaction. Now, talk for a second about what your understanding of the relationship between the game of Dungeons & Dragons and The Lord of the Rings is.
Well, because honestly, Dungeons and Dragons, first of all, is based primarily in Tolkien-esque high fantasy. Like the races coincide, like the adventures coincide, like all of this stuff. It pulls straight out of Tolkien-esque fiction to create this kind of adventure.
So here's the chicken or the egg question. Do you think an interaction like that, the game is like it because of the book, or the book is like, I don't know.
Well, I think the book was written, but like you said, it feels like a series of vignettes because it was. These were bedtime stories that he was telling to his kids that he came up with kind of probably on the fly. He kept the same names running through it and then probably stitched them into a larger plot later. So he had very detailed scenes like the one with the troll, but he didn't have detailed scenes of them just chilling out in Rivendell. It was the exciting parts is what he wants to tell his kids about.
You're right. So there's like, okay, now he has to get past the spiders, or now he fights the trolls, or now he's got to get past the goblins, or now they got to sneak into the dragons.
You realize I have the entire plot broken down this way, right? Like I can go like through the whole book breaking it down into
right. So there's all those little bedtime story-ish vignettes. But now talk about the overarching plot, because he did put some thought into this. So what would you say the themes are and the driving thing is?
The driving thing, like the main plot, like 75% of this book is these idiots trying to haul their worthless carcasses across a countryside that wants them dead. And they screw it up at every turn. What do you mean you all failed your perception checks? Okay, you're all captured by spiders. What do you mean you just keep chasing the lights into the woods? Okay, you're all captured by elves. No, you can't just escape. No, what do you mean you're going to wait 2 weeks until they do get drunk? Okay, fine, whatever. You can't all get into the barrels. Okay, fine, you're all in the barrels and you get to the next town. Screw it, I'm done. Like, it's just...
Yeah, you could tell when they actually tried to film the movie, it was just so absurd that they completely had to rewrite those scenes.
Because it's just massive failure after massive failure every single time. And then they show up at this mountain, and it's like for the first time they start thinking, there's a dragon in here, and we all suck. What are we going to do about this?
Can you imagine if it had gone down like this in an actual D&D campaign where like the end boss is this ultra high level dragon? You got this party full of noobs. They're just going to get roasted.
All right, guys, listen. I planned this campaign so you would gain experience throughout the way, and by the time you got here, you would be at a high enough level to handle the dragon. But you all have failed every single encounter that I have put in front of you, and you all still suck. there is no chance that you can stand up against this thing. And they all kind of realized it. Like, they all got super scared. Like, what are we supposed to do about this dragon? Oh, we'll send the thief down. He'll go look at it, and maybe he'll come up with something. And so they send Bilbo with the one magic item they've been able to get this whole campaign to go check out Smaug. And all right, then this was the first time when I was a kid of interacting or experiencing the concept of an intelligent dragon. Because before that, I had always...
Not just a dumb dragon, like a giant lizard, but like equivalent of human.
Yeah, if you are not aware of high Tolkien-esque fantasy, Tolkien was the one that had the idea that dragons could be intelligent. Not just intelligent, but really intelligent. They live very long lives. And there are several scenes where Bilbo has like an in-depth conversation with this thing that's just wants to eat him for stealing his stuff. And it's so well done. And it's so interesting to have that kind of perspective. You're expecting it to be this dumb brute that he just needs to kill. But having like this one-on-one character conversation with a dragon was just so cool to me.
So when I was researching this, I found this term called animism. Animism is that all things, including inanimate objects, possess human-like intelligence. And when you actually start to look at all of the things in this, like everything does.
The spiders have conversations.
The spiders do. The goblins do.
Yes, the eagles have a hierarchy and a king.
The eagles do. Everything has human-like intelligence in this story.
And that's part of what makes Tolkien...
The trees do.
That's what makes Tolkien's fantasy so cool, is it's not just humans running around like having adventures. It's there's some serious things out in the world that are stacked against them.
Now, there's a lot of literary criticism of Tolkien, of his treatment of race, in a bit of a presentism kind of way, where they basically, that if you were to take these races as analogs for human races, that it's a bit racist, but it's not really substantial.
Here's the thing: is we're, at least in the U.S., we're at a point where racism is a really hot button issue, where we're acknowledging that it exists and it has impacted the development of our culture and our society over the long term in ways that we may find uncomfortable. And having those conversations is very important. However, I think it is important, like fantasy stuff like this, to acknowledge that that kind of stuff is real. And like throughout this book, like we keep having these quote unquote high races, like the men and the elves, constantly looking down on the halflings and the dwarves as being lesser to them. And whatever that says about the current situation, I don't want to even get into that. But the fact that Tolkien decided to incorporate this very real thing that we are still coping with in a modern society, as far as fear of the other and not understanding another's culture, and bringing that into this kind of a fantasy setting, just makes it feel so much more real.
I like this as a tool for a father. Like if he's raising young children and he's trying to help them cope with things like this at a time when it may have been a very turbulent thing in the world, to concoct these fantasies that give a degree of separation to it, where he can deal with the difficult issues without connecting it to the real world, and let them make the connection.
Just kind of planting the foundation, or just the baseline, the foundational knowledge of how you should treat other people.
Like the elves look down on the dwarves because they think they're better than them, but then they actually needed them, and when they worked together, they were able to accomplish great things.
Well, I mean, in Tolkien's fantasy, the elves are better than the dwarves, but I mean that's
and that's where the criticisms come in.
Is that they were functionally better. Well, that also could be an anachronism from the fact that he was writing this stuff in the 1930s and 40s, where there was very strong public thoughts that that's how it was, that some people were better than others.
So there's some theories out there, and I think, and having considered them, I think they're substantial, that the main driver of Thorin and the House of Durin is very much an analog to one of the major themes of the Old Testament. And that is that God made a covenant with the Jews that they would live in the Promised Land, and they went to Egypt and became slaves, and then they needed to return to the Promised Land and get it back, but it had been possessed by other lands, and they had to come back to the land of their inheritance and conquer it back because it was their rightful possession.
Well, that goes back to a chicken the egg thing again, because that could just be the hero with 1,000 faces.
Okay, so I did a lot of studying about this, and we haven't really introduced the vocabulary on this, so I want to talk about it.
Okay.
So you're talking about the hero's journey, or the hero with 1,000 faces, the monomyth.
Basically what I'm saying is there's only a handful of stories that exist, and we just keep retelling them in different flavors.
Yes, but as a devout Catholic, there's no reason to doubt Occam's razor on J.R.R. Tolkien being influenced by the story of the dwarves paralleling the Jews returning to the promised land of Jerusalem.
Well, if we presume that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote himself as the protagonist, as Bilbo, as this person who felt inadequate to be leading these people that he was with in World War I, that eventually rose to the leadership position.
Yes.
Is there a reason then that he would write the whole Exodus story into these, with him at the head of it?
Well, that's the right question. So the hero's journey, the monomyth, starts with our protagonist receiving a call to adventure.
Oh.
Is that like getting drafted into the UK forces at the beginning of World War I? Like, he was definitely reluctant. He wasn't like, yeah, I see what's going on in Europe, I want to go over there and get involved. He was just like a lieutenant that didn't know what he wanted to be when he grew up.
Very much like a wizard showing up at your door, completely unexpected when you were living a normal life.
Yes. And then there's some kind of supernatural aid and a threshold where you begin the transformation. There's a helper, there's a mentor, there's challenges and temptations. You descend into the abyss, then there's some type of revelation, a transformation happens, there's an atonement, and you return back home with some gift of the goddess to the place where you began.
Yeah.
That's the hero's journey.
Bilbo follows that exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so then back to your original question. How does that tie in, from your perspective and the research that you've done, with the Old Testament and all of that? Was he just drawing on that as a story device or as a literary device, or was he actually intending to retell this kind of downtrodden people's uprising?
Well, I like the way that you said it about how it was just these strung together series of absurd child bedtime stories where there was just a consistent list of characters, but then it got tacked onto something that was a little bit more substantial in the background. And that's where I found my enjoyment in this book, in my reading of it as a grown-up. Because like you, I read it as a child, and I enjoyed it as a story of dwarves and elves and men and fighting dragons and goblins and wolves and eagles, all those things. But this time around, I was like, okay, this really is a moral dilemma he's presenting here. Like, for instance, when the elves descended into the lonely mountain, the dwarves descended into the lonely mountain, they provoked the dragon who'd been sleeping and not terrorizing the countryside, and he departed, and they triggered the destruction that fell on the other people. Like, the dwarves never actually had to confront the dragon directly.
No.
But he went back to the lake town and laid waste to the place.
Yep.
Doesn't that feel a bit like the beginning of World War I?
That feels a bit like the DM knew that all the noobs were going to get roasted by the dragon, and so it's like, oh, the dragon left. Oh, did he come back? No, he died somehow.
I like this parallel of the Dungeons and Dragons party. Don't keep doing it, but stay with me.
Don't keep doing it.
The British didn't start World War I.
Mm-hmm.
It was the assassination of Ferdinand in Austria or something like that.
Well, don't minimize the coolness of interweaving politics and how World War I started. That was awesome. And I don't know if you've ever heard the actual story of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. If you haven't, it is fascinating because the assassins that were trying to kill him screwed it up entirely. One of them called up and said, screw it, I'm going to go get lunch, went to a restaurant, and then the Archduke's car broke down in front of the restaurant the guy was sitting in. It's insane how the whole thing went down.
Yeah. So, there's this element of Bilbo as the protagonist, just he's not really invested in the dwarves'
at all.
Heritage?
No, at all. He got dragged on it, kicking and screaming for the first 10 miles of it.
But over the course of the story, like any soldier can tell you, they may not know what they're fighting for, but they do know that they want to protect the life of the person next to them in the trench.
And that's that is really, you can feel the military coming out in that, because it doesn't matter what the end goal is. It doesn't matter like why we're trudging down this dark path through this forest full of enchanted spiders. It's just, we're here, we're in this situation, and we have to look out for each other because no one else is going to. And anybody that's been in the military has felt that. You've been in this situation where everything sucks. It's all going to crap, but I'm going to keep working because if I do any less, then that guy's got to pick up my slack, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah. So Bilbo kind of develops that as it goes on. He goes from just being mostly uninterested to really being vested and friends with these people and caring about what happens to them.
These interchangeable dwarves whose names I don't remember.
Yeah. Now, as much as it was kind of this immature story that was kind of like a collection of bedtime stories stapled onto a larger plot, he was also showing a lot of promise. I mean, like Gollum and Beorn and Thorin all have very unique voices. And there's these overarching themes that became the foundation of high fantasy, of this alternative secondary world that, rather than the world in which we live. It's told from the viewpoint of one main hero. There's these unknown forces of evil with great power, and there's this theme of good versus evil happening all around that are the foundation of high fantasy.
That does feel very much inspired by World War I and later World War II, because these were points in history where it was very clear. Good guys, bad guys. Conquerors, defenders. Like the morally righteous and those guys, the freaking Nazis over there, the guys with the spikes on their helmets.
Yeah.
And this plays clearly in Tolkien-esque fantasy. There is no...
They weren't Nazis yet.
There were Nazis yet, I get that. But no, there is no gray here. There, in Tolkien fantasy, there is the bad guys and there is the good guys. And there's no gray. There's no middle ground. You're either on the good or the bad, and that is it.
Do you feel like there was no middle ground here? Because I feel like there was a little bit. I like how it all came to a head, and we haven't gotten there yet.
Hey,
there's something
we were having dinner in the woods, and you came into our dinner party. How dare you go to jail forever? I don't care about you anymore. Like, seriously, Ben? Yeah, the dwarves, or the elves were seriously jerks in that portion of the story.
All right, well, let's stop and talk about this, because I think it's an important conflict that plays in the rest of the universe. There's definitely going to be a different set of priorities and morality surrounding a group of people that is functionally immortal, and how they interact with groups that aren't. Which
you could imagine that if you lived forever, it would be fine to just wait out all the mortal races. It's like, I don't really care what Lake Town's doing. Like, I've seen Lake Town burn to the ground and get rebuilt 4 times. Like, right. Who cares? Yeah, the perception of time and what is important in the long term is radically different for somebody that lives 1,000 years versus somebody that lives 100 years. But in this Tolkien-esque fantasy, we're dealing with the elves and the dwarves. We know the elves are functionally immortal, but the dwarves are talking about live for hundreds of years as well.
Okay, but you were talking about how polar everything was. There was 2 groups of elves in this. Do you feel like one group of elves was evil and one was good?
I mean, the Rivendell dwarves brought them in, gave them everything they wanted, put them Rivendell elves, sorry. Put them up in, like, 5-star hotel rooms, and literally sang Bilbo to sleep. I feel like they're pretty cool. They're being like super good hosts.
So I wonder who they were. Like, did he imagine that as being like the French? How the French treated him when he got to Europe to fight?
I don't know if we can draw a clear 1-to-1 like ratio with all of these things.
But it influenced it.
Well, here's the difference though: is Rivendell was one paragraph of and they had a long rest and it was a magical kingdom and it was great and everybody was happy. So nothing interesting happened. So we're not going to tell that story. Let's move on. Versus, they had serious problems with the isolated, the insular wood elves, and that was a big chunk of a part of the story. And they talked about it at great length. And they were clearly antagonistic towards our troop of dwarves that were going through the woods.
Yeah, but not evil like the goblins.
No, they were evil like a group of disinterested others who had their own priorities.
Yeah, and that feels like some of the players in the World War I conflict. some were enemies, and some were just kind of like apathetic players.
It's like, listen, you're either on our side or on the other side. It's like, are we though? No. No, I don't think so.
Exactly.
I couldn't name them off the top of my head. I'm not that big of a history buff.
As I was reading about Tolkien, I read of a very influential childhood visit he had to Switzerland, where he was up in the very tall mountains that influence his description of the misty mountains in Middle Earth.
Okay.
But that's what you do. You write about what you know. You tell about the experiences and things in your imagination. And if all you did was grow up in the south of England, you wouldn't have much to go on. But if you take a trip to Switzerland and see these dramatic, jagged mountains, you describe it that way in your writing.
Did he fall asleep in a cave without leaving anybody on watch and get kidnapped by goblins?
and roll a 0 on your Constitution check?
That's like, so the DM's there's like, okay, you guys make camp for the night. Who's on watch? Nobody's on watch. Okay, roll perception. Okay, everybody failed perception. Okay,
all right.
You are all captured by
Goblin
goblins.
King takes you all prisoner.
This was going to be a quick little fight with goblins, but nobody's awake, so everybody's captured by goblins, and now I have to improvise a whole session about this. Oh, Bilbo, you're knocked unconscious. We don't know what happens. Ha ha! I got out of
it. Yeah. Well, okay, so let's bring up the elephant in the room, and that is the Ring of Power. Now, this is a good example, I think, of what George Lucas was trying to do in the Star Wars prequels. So Tolkien wrote this story, and it was out there, and it was this world of Middle Earth that deserved to be explored a little bit, and he decided to go back and draw on what he'd done 13 years before, and in the function of the story, a generation before. So you have these connections, like one of the dwarves that were on this adventure with Bilbo of provoking Smaug and getting back the treasure of Lonely Mountain, where the ancestor of Gimli, the dwarf, who was of the Fellowship of the Ring, as well as Gollum himself. And then, of course, Bilbo brought home the ring, which turned out to be the Ring of Power, which was the,
So this is part of Tolkien writing that I am aware of. And the rewriting of Bilbo's Ring of Invisibility into Sauron's Ring of Power is a total retcon.
Yeah. He just went back and changed it. Like in the original story in The Hobbit, it wasn't intended to be the Ring of Power connected to Sauron. It was
a Ring of Invisibility.
It was just a trinket.
Yep. It was a magical item that existed in the world because Bilbo needed to be a better thief, honestly.
But Bilbo brought it home and he made the connection, and there we are.
I think it worked out. I
think so too.
It's a little weird on how he decided that it's going to work. Like, it's not a ring of... It doesn't make you invisible. It just pulls you into this other spirit realm that exists parallel. It's like, can't it just be a side effect of the Ring of Power? Okay, no. Spiritual thing? All right, fine. You can go with that.
Yeah. Now, Tolkien does something really well that I like. Frequently in writing... So the most recent example I can think of is the third movie in the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure saga, where they'd been hinting for the previous two movies that at some point in the future, Bill and Ted were going to write a song that was such a good song that it was going to unite all of humanity forever. That's a really lofty thing to say. Now, the problem that they'd set up for themselves is that if they were ever going to actually come to the point where they filmed the movie where this actually happened, somebody had to sit down and write that song.
Yes, it had to be a real thing. So the only way to get out of this is to do what Tenacious D did, and you just write a song called Tribute about the song that saved the world.
Okay, that is a good way to get out of it. And that's the point I wanted to make, is that frequently authors will say there was a poem written by the sages that was one for the ages or something like that. And they just talk about it. They say there was a song that the people sang, or there was a poem that was written. But Tolkien writes the songs and he writes the poems, and they rhyme and they have lore and they have backstory and they're good.
That's true. I mean, like I said, this book had several songs in it, and the songs were legit. Andy Serkis sang them very well, and it's, now that you point that out, you're right. It's crazy that this guy had to okay, crap, I'm done writing the book, but I've now got to write 6 songs that make sense.
Yeah, that contain the lore, and they're in the voice, and they have, they meet all the things. And I bet writing those songs and those poems is really difficult. Like, it'd be so much easier to just talk about them without actually writing them.
Of course, we're assuming that he didn't write random dwarven drinking songs like in the margins of his notebook while he was sitting in university learning about linguistics.
Or while he was sitting in France waiting to go to the front lines in World War I.
Yeah, one of my favorite hobbies is to come up with random elvish poetry in a
dwarven drinking songs.
In a language that I invented.
Yeah. So, as we pointed out, it wasn't the original intent for The Hobbit to lead to The Lord of the Rings. And it was a little bit of revisionism to go back and turn it into that. But it worked out.
Oh, it worked out okay.
So, it was decidedly smaller stakes what would happen. But by the end of The Hobbit, I would say it was relatively epic what snowballed into eventually happening. So, go ahead and finish the plot synopsis.
Can I keep doing it in my D&D-esque way?
Yes.
Okay, so we kind of did the goblins, where they were going through the mountains, they got to a cave, they all went to sleep, and they were captured by goblins. And then, do you remember how they were saved from the goblins, Ben?
Yeah, they just like were running away, and they were going to get caught, and they were completely overwhelmed, and then they just showed up at Beorn's house and closed the door.
Gandalf saved them. They were in front of the Goblin King. Gandalf showed up and set off a flashbang and said, "Run!" And they just ran away. Like, that's how they got out of it, is the veteran player got them out of it again.
Okay, sorry, I was skipping ahead to the next time they do that.
No problem. And then the one person that was interested in role-playing, Bilbo, he put him in a one-on-one scene with this character that we never see again in this book called Gollum, and had an interesting back-and-forth riddle contest.
Yes, which sounds very D&D-like.
Yeah, it's like, all right, none of you want to talk this session? Fine. The one guy that wants to talk, let's talk, and let's do some story stuff. And then, yes, they ran away. They showed up at Beorn's house, and they were, all right, it is this magical lodge of nature where the animals come at Beorn's beck and call and serve him food, and things are happening, and they're there for 2 weeks, and it's fine. Nothing really interesting happens, so let's move on.
Hang on, I want to go back to the riddle thing for a second. Okay.
Which thing?
Because it was very classic, it was like the ancient Greek stories, of talking to the Sphinx or that kind of thing. And one of the riddles that he gave him, Gollum actually said something. There was a riddle about something that's white and gold and has inside, or I don't remember what. Yeah. The answer was egg.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And Gollum actually said that in the book, we taught grandmother to suck eggs, which was one of the bad at magic.
I remember.
Bad at English.
I remember hearing that. I'm like,
teaching grandmother to suck eggs.
I've heard that before, and I know that is a British idiom. Ha ha.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
we interrupt this plot synopsis to pat myself on the back. Good job, Ben. Okay. All right, your next step is you have to go through these woods and you have to stay on the path. Whatever you do, don't get off the path. Okay, they're in the woods. They're on the path. This sucks. Oh, there's a river. We're not supposed to touch the water. What do? And this is the only time one of the dwarves gets separated from the other ones, in that the fat one failed a simple dexterity check, fell into the water, and knocks unconscious for like 3 days. It's like, okay.
Now they have to carry the fat one.
All right, you all are starving. What do? Well, we keep going on the path. Okay, but you're starving. Okay, but we said we're not supposed to get off the path, so we're just going to keep on the path. Oh, okay, all right. There are lights in the distance. Ooh, spooky. What do? Well, we go towards the lights. You said you were going to stay on the path. Okay, fine. You go towards the lights, you get there, and they disappear, and the lights are gone. What do? Nothing. Okay, you see lights again off in the distance. What do? Oh, we go towards the lights again. Again. Okay, fine. So you go towards the lights, and they disappear. They disappear, they show up in the distance again somewhere else. What do you do now? Oh, we go towards the lights again. Oh, for God's sake. Okay, you're all knocked unconscious. And you're captured by spiders. I'm sick of it. You're all captured by spiders. All of you.
Wait. All of us are captured by spiders? Yes, all of you.
All of you. Oh, except the one that's invisible. Like, okay.
And it's this very child's... Okay, so this is a theme that happens throughout this, that maybe it's because of this D&D DM kind of thing. But like, there's lots of the bad guys catch him, but nothing lethal happens to anyone.
Yeah, it keeps happening. Like he doesn't want to.
We'll get to him later.
He doesn't want to kill his characters.
The trolls do it. The goblins do it. The spiders do it. The elves do it. The elves weren't lethal.
This is the one thing that feels so D&D. It's like, okay, wait, you all failed your checks? Well, crap. There's 13 of you. I expect at least 2 of you to pass these checks. But if you all passed, you all should really probably just die. But I don't want to kill any of my players because that makes me look like a jerk. So you're all wrapped up in webs, and you have an invisible ally that can come save you. Hooray! And yeah, and then Bilbo comes and cuts them all out of these webs. Like, this is the thing. Like, the dwarves are so worthless through this entire journey, and Bilbo keeps digging them out of these situations.
It was the big dilemma of making the movie, and it's why the tone is so different between the book and the movie.
And then they're captured by the elves, and it's like, what were you doing in our woods? It's like, well, that's our business. It's none of yours. Like, well, if you're not going to tell me, I'm going to throw you in jail. Fine, throw me in jail. And then Bilbo's invisible in this elvish kingdom with all of the dwarves in jail. And he's like, oh, it's like, all right, you guys need to come up with a plan for a jailbreak. And like, this is the DM, like, I'm throwing you a bone. This could be really awesome. Go. What do you got? Okay, I'm going to wait until the elves get drunk and I'm going to steal the keys. They don't drink. What do? I'm going to wait until they get drunk and I'm going to steal the keys. Like, but they don't drink. Like, I'm going to wait. Okay, fine. It takes 2 weeks. And it's like, in the book, they like kind of gloss over that. But like, Bilbo was invisible, living and stealing crap like from like a rat under these tables, and all the dwarves were in prison for 2 weeks. Like, that's a long time. Like, fine, they get drunk, you steal the keys, now what? We're going to get in the barrels, and we're going to float down the river with the trash. You know what? I'm behind that. That's pretty awesome. Okay, you all jump in the barrels, and you get out, and you barely make it. Good job. Now what? We're going to float down the river. Okay, but you're in the barrels. That's fine. We're going to float down the river. Okay. 2 days pass. What do? Well, we're floating down the river in the barrels.
I remember that too. Like, how long were they in those barrels? In the movie, they're like, we can't have them in the barrels for 2 days.
Yeah, and they wrap them all up and they make a raft out of them and they keep going. And Bilbo's like there, just chilling on this raft of barrels. And they get to where they're going. It's like, okay, it's been 2 days. Your friends are in the barrels. You don't know if they're alive. What do? I go into the town and I steal some food because I'm hungry. Your friends are all in the barrels.
Still in the barrels.
And you're going to go into town to steal food. Like, yep, that's what I'm doing. It's like, okay, you are really becoming the rogue of this party. And then this has got to be the thing that drives me the most nuts is Thorin, one of our 3 named elves or dwarves in my mind, has this moment where, you know what, I'm getting into this. I like this D&D thing. I'm going to role play. I'm going to expand on my background a little bit. And he gives this great speech about the Arkenstone. And like, this is my family's legacy, and they dug deep and found the heart of the mountain, and it is the one thing that I care about, and it is amazing, and I'm going to go down there, and everybody can have everything else, but I just want the Arkenstone. Okay, great. Bilbo, you get into the Dragon's Hoard. What do? I steal the Arkenstone. Seriously? You're in a room.
Put it in my pocket and don't tell anybody.
He describes this room as like, it's enormous. Like this Dragon's Hoard. Like, this is where the term Dragon's Hoard comes from. There is treasure immeasurable stashed in this football field sized room. Like, it's piles of precious metals and gems that this dragon is sleeping on. And this freaking halfling who doesn't care at all about any of it steals the one thing that his other player cares about. He's just kicking up drama. That's all this is.
So we put on this audiobook as we were driving across the country, and I listened to it with my wife and all of our kids. Uh-huh. And at one point I turned around, I'm like, so who's the narrator? Because I don't think Tolkien was that careless that he didn't think this through. And I have a theory about it. I think it's Bilbo writing There and Back Again. Because even though it's written in the third person omniscient, everything he says is stuff that Bilbo would know. Like, there's nothing in there that he wouldn't know.
No, I agree with that.
Like when Gandalf runs off and leaves them, he doesn't know where Gandalf went, and it's not in there.
Well, those were the sessions that the veteran player didn't show up because he had better things to do.
I love it. Keep doing it. Okay, so but then that's where the movie got a bit unfocused. Cause now like, well, here's an opportunity for us to get more backstory to some of our favorite characters. So let's throw in Legolas and Galadriel and the orcs. Oh my gosh, the orcs. And that we need one of the dwarves to have a love interest. We need to know what's going on with the administrator and the wormy guy. And
I completely skipped over that part where they were stuck in the trees. It's like, all right, you're running from the wolves. What do you do? We climb the trees. Okay, you're in the trees. What do you do? Well, we stay in the trees. Okay, the trees are on fire. What do you do? Well, we stay in the trees. Okay, eagles come and save you because I don't want to kill you all just yet. So you're all saved. Hooray. More Deus Ex Machina to save these idiot dwarves.
You know the movie Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell and Dustin Hoffman?
I am aware of it, yes.
So I love this part where he's like trying to get him to, he's like, okay, so let's pretend you're right and you're a character in someone's story. You need to find out whether it's a comedy or a tragedy. He's like, all right, well, now we can find out if it's really a story. Just go home and don't do anything and see if something happens to provoke the plot to move forward.
Ooh.
So he's like sitting there on his couch and he doesn't even want to change the channel on his TV. And then like the bulldozer comes through the wall.
I've not seen this movie. I'm just aware of it, but that's...
Oh, okay. Yeah, and that's what it is, and that's kind of what's happening here. Like you said, it's like they decided they didn't want to do anything, so you just want to hide in the trees, so now the trees are on fire. I forget how the fire even started.
The goblins eventually showed up, looking after, like, well, what are those wolves howling at? So they went and saw. It's like, oh, it's a bunch of dwarves stuck in a tree. That's like the tree's on fire, because that's what you would do as a bad guy.
So, speaking of bad guys, and you've mentioned all of them here, so who would you say is the chief antagonist of the book?
The DM. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not the correct answer. It keeps shifting depending on the situation they're in. Again, this feels like a series of vignettes, and each vignette has its own little kind of sub-contained plot or obstacle or hurdle that they had to come over. Overcome.
Yeah.
So, honestly, I feel like the chief antagonist through this whole thing is Thorin. Just being a complete idiot.
I agree with you. My wife and I disagreed on this. She thinks it's Smaug, and I don't think it is at all.
Smaug was the last thing that they needed to overcome, and they didn't even overcome it. They provoked it, and he went and killed a ton of people, and then died somehow. Like that, Smaug he was an interesting character and my favorite in the book, but clearly he did not do anything to change anybody as far as the storytelling goes.
Now, this was my favorite plot twist in the original book, and this is where I thought it went from being just a trifle to being something substantial. Because then it felt like the scene from The Dark Knight where there's the two fairies, and they both have detonators, and there's a bomb on the opposite boat.
Yes. Okay.
Like, it went from just being a series of vignettes to being an actual moral dilemma. Thorin now has possession of the treasure. The dragon is terrorized the countryside for generations, and he has more wealth than he could ever know what to do with, and an opportunity to make peace with the people of Lake Town for the destruction he brought upon them, to pay them back for their generosity that they gave upon him when he showed up with nothing, to potentially prevent this major conflict that's about to break out now that everyone hears that the dragon has been dispatched and there's this giant unguarded mountain full of treasure.
I love that this is where your brain went, because this is so indicative of how you see the world. Because I didn't think that at all. Like when Thorin heard about the at that time it was only 2 armies that were coming to take the treasure, and he started building the wall to seal off the fortress, like, no, this is my treasure. My ancestors constructed this whole thing, amassed this wealth. This is mine, and you punks ain't going to come in here at the 11th hour and steal it from me. I'm on Thorin's side on this one. I'm like, yeah, this is totally his. My only concern is there's 14 of you, and there's 2 armies coming. You have no chance of defending this thing, so you might have to give up some of the treasure as a sheer practical sense, like just to make sure you don't get completely overrun in the first 15 minutes of what would be a slaughter of 14 dwarves that nobody would care about. But I think Thorin has every right to claim this as 100% his.
Okay. So there's a minor play of the theme of the entire Lord of the Rings saga here in The Hobbit. It's one of my favorite themes of all of this. And that is that, and it's a very Christian theme, it is that humility and meekness can be greater than power and wealth.
And you're referring to, in the story-wise, Bilbo
Yes.
taking the one thing that Thorin wanted that he stole and concealed from his friend, with air quotes, and giving it to his sworn enemies that are trying to siege the treasure that is 100% his. That's what you're referring to?
No.
Oh, okay.
Let me land the other
Sorry,
one.
that's my bad.
So it's the same thing with Frodo and Sam in the ring. You know, it's that this ring promises great power. Bilbo left Bag End under vague motivations, seeking to maybe go on an adventure. But at some point, he realized that the journey is long and arduous and not that great. And he says, here's a quote from the book from Bilbo: "Victory, after all, I suppose. Well, it seems a very gloomy business."
Well, this is...
he recognizes this, but hang on. So the dwarves were starting this party to go on this quest, and they brought Gandalf because they needed a high-level wizard, and then they brought Bilbo because they needed a thief, and they didn't care what level he was. But Gandalf kind of hinted at the destiny of Bilbo in all of this. The dwarves are sometimes like, why'd we even bring him along? And Gandalf's like, you'll find out. And so Bilbo has a destiny to be revealed, and his destiny is to show Thorin and everyone involved that peace is worth more than treasure.
I mean, is it though? Because Thorin never really gave up the whole treasure. He gave up, I think Bilbo gave up his portion of the treasure to stop the battle.
Not all of it. He took some home with him, but he was limited more on what he could carry than what he was entitled to.
But
and he didn't care.
There was plenty of treasure to go around, but Thorin didn't give up. He didn't say like, "Oh, you know what? You're right. Here's half the treasure." He's like, "No, if he
did on his deathbed after the battle, he was like, Bilbo, you were right. I should have seen it."
How much did he give up though, on his deathbed?
Of the treasure? I don't remember.
See, that's the thing. I think it was an inconsequential amount, all things said and done.
Now, Gandalf is probably what I'd say is the closest thing to a Christ figure in the books, although some much smaller scholars than I refer to Christ's 3 known rules of prophet, priest, and king, and they divide those up among different characters in the saga. The prophet piece is Gandalf, the priest piece is the Hobbits, and the king piece is Aragorn.
Why are you trying to draw such strong Christian ties into my fantasy book here, man? Like you're like, why? Like you're taking this long journey to try to draw these 1-to-1 ratios. Like, can it just be a fantasy story about 13 idiot dwarves?
You sound like you're quoting Samuel Clemens. Because he was a Christian writer, and he was telling the story of his life and his experience. And this was a man who was a lieutenant in World War I, who was a Catholic, who helped convert his best friend. And he had faith, and he had, he wanted to believe that humility and meekness could overcome power and corruption.
This has always been my problem with liberal arts. 100%. I remember reading Watership Down in high school, and they asked me, what was the theme of this book? And I said, the theme of this book was rabbits, like trying to find a new place to live. It's a story. Stop trying to dig deep into this. Like, I feel like if you interviewed the author, he would say the same thing. Like, I understand what...
No, I don't think Tolkien would say that.
Tolkien was a very intelligent person and a very deliberate writer, and I get that. But at the same time, why can't you just appreciate the story, man? Why can't you just why what part of this?
Because I think it was deliberate. I think even though he meant to hide these things, he still meant for them to be found.
But that's fine. But why do you derive such pleasure or such? Why do you want to find them? You're working very, very hard to find something that you think might be buried there that might not be, and instead of just enjoying what is presented to you.
Bilbo was an anachronism. He was a peaceful guy in a time of war. everyone around him was fighting, and he was like, this fighting could all stop if we just stop fighting. And I'm willing to give up, like you said, untold wealth if we could just stop fighting and I could go back home.
At the same time, there was parts of the story where Bilbo did take out the sword and did recognize that this is a time for violence. And there was,
yes.
and he knew that. Yes, we can draw parallels to the protagonist and to the direct experiences of the writer, but there's a point where the 1-to-1 ratios become so stretched that why are they even worth looking for? When you're talking about breaking Gandalf into one of the three pieces of the Christ analogy, I get it. And you can do that with almost anything if you go abstract enough. But there's a point where, who cares? It's a good story. It's entertaining. Clearly, he drew from his own personal experiences. Clearly, we can draw some straight lines from the mountains that he saw to the Alps that he walked through, and to the dwarves that he never felt a part of but was inspired to lead, to the troops that he had in World War I. At some level, we can do that. But then if we keep going 2 and 3 or 4 more layers of abstraction, it starts to lose all meaning, and who cares? Because once we're that many degrees from Kevin Bacon, you can draw lines to anything. This could be a total revelation about the Hindu faith, and we could probably make just as valid equations to that. But why? Just enjoy the story about the elves.
Well, I disagree with the last thing you just said. I don't think you can just abstract it as much that you could tie it to any faith. This clearly came from his Christian point of view.
Well, does that matter?
Anyway,
does that matter?
Well, it's because I'm tying it to the themes. Because this particular theme, that humility and meekness can overcome power and wealth, it is a very Christian theme.
But is it a Christian theme because it's built into Christianity, or is it a Christian theme because it exists in the culture that Christianity is a part of? It's this. We're talking about memes and ideas inside of ideas again.
Yeah, and you earlier kind of sidestepped a chicken in the egg thing, and that's one as well. So I mentioned animism, which was a new thing I'd learned. There's the temptations and corruptions that come from love of wealth that ultimately take Thorin, a character that we'd started to become endeared to, and just turned him sour there at the end. And it also kind of turned everyone against each other and then made them weak to the outsiders. So while the elves and the lake town, the humans and the dwarves were kind of arguing over the outcome of the treasure, meanwhile they've got their back turned and the goblins and the wolves sneak up on them.
This is a common theme through the rest of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, is that greed becomes the evil darkness that drives people to do bad things in the first place. It's everybody's desire to make the changes or whatever with the One Ring that drives them to these mental breaks that cause all these terrible things to happen. And only the hobbits are the ones that are so chill and just so happy with the way that things are that they're not affected by it in that way. But, I mean, if you want to talk about underlying themes, then that clearly is one, and I have to give that to you. If we're going to go more degrees to Kevin Bacon, I'm going to be more skeptical again. So,
Bilbo, there's also kind of from this idea of it being a parallel to World War I, is how anti-pastoral warfare is. How it just destroys peace and the land and the countryside and the relationships and stuff. And I feel like that's what Smaug represented. He represented just this mindless destruction that comes when you're not vigilant against.
So the intelligent dragon that just wants to accumulate wealth and will lay waste to anything in its path in order to accumulate it.
All right. Yes, I want to talk about dragons for a second, but first, if you can, finish your little vignette of the DM campaign. Bring this thing to a conclusion.
Well, the very last part is every good campaign after the big bad is defeated and all of the things are done is you have an epilogue session where you sit down with your player characters and you decide this is how the story ends. And we're going to write a little bit about, and they lived happily ever after. Yeah. And so they all came, they sat down, and none of the dwarves showed up. It's like, where's everybody else? It's like,
No, two of the dwarves went back to Bag End with Bilbo.
Did they?
The ones that were the most distantly related to Thorin.
I don't even remember that at all.
Yeah.
In the book.
Yeah, it came up in my research. It's in the book.
I'm sure it is, but like that must be so glossed over. Anyway, so like functionally, the way I heard it and listened to it, the only two players that showed up for the epilogue campaign was Gandalf and Bilbo. And so they had this great session where it's like, all right, Bilbo, what do you want to, or Gandalf, what do you want to do? It's like, I don't care. I'm a high level wizard. I'm going to do whatever I want, whenever I want to. Okay, well, we'll get to you later. Bilbo, well, I'm going to go back home because that's what my character's been talking about this whole time. And I've learned something, and like that's it. The whole session is Bilbo kind of waxing prolifically about.
No. I'm changing what you're saying. All right, you as the DM are mad that all the dwarves didn't show up. So, all right, Bilbo, you arrive back in the Shire, and they're auctioning off all of your stuff because you've been gone for so long because you wasted so much time sitting around waiting for the guys to get drunk.
You're right. I forgot about that little detail, but you're absolutely right. It's like, we got like that's got to make the last little session interesting for our player characters. I'm gonna go home. All right. Great, you go home, and they're selling all your junk. It's like, dang it, now I've got to deal with this problem.
They think you're dead because you've been gone so long.
But they kind of, at the same time, like it was mostly played up for comedy because it was very hand-waved, like, oh, well, like it took years to unravel the fact that he wasn't actually dead, and he never did get his good sofa back. And just like kind of punchline-y phrases like that.
Yeah. Well, this was a seminal piece of work that wasn't designed to be the genesis of something that would change the world, and yet it was. So it's interesting to go back and read it from the world that's been changed by it and see it for its imperfections as well as its glimpses of brilliance. And I appreciated it in that way.
Yes, and if we're going to talk about imperfections, like Tolkien writing is not perfect. Like it is... I'll tell you right now, like it is important if you really like literature and high fantasy and all that to read Tolkien, but that doesn't make Tolkien any easier to read. Like getting through, like you talk to anybody who's read The Fellowship of the Ring, it's a slog. The first half of that book is rough.
First 100 pages. Oh yeah.
But
I never made it. I never made it as a kid.
as
I read The Hobbit and thought, oh, that was fine. I'll read Fellowship of the Ring.
Well, it hurts. Like I can only take so many descriptions of how green the trees are before my eyes start to roll back in my head. But you made the analogy perfectly. This really feels like a seed. And knowing the time difference and knowing kind of some of the backstory, you can see where this was like the germination or the start of some of the ideas that Tolkien was having for this much larger thing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me to read it with you. I enjoyed it, or I can't remember which order that happened in, but does it really matter?
It does. You tell me to do stuff and I do it. Like this was your idea. So I'm taking no responsibility for how terrible this episode was. Thanks for listening anyway, anybody. Are we doing this part? Just roll right into it?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, well, I got. Let me go first this time because I got two things I want to say. One is I promised next episode, which will be our 2-year anniversary. So we'll do kind of a state of the podcast. I think maybe like an episode where if you're a new listener, here's what the podcast is all about kind of thing. And we're going to do a gift card drawing. So I have 3 gift cards to the Cheesecake Factory that I got when I was in Florida that I'll pick 3 people at random who have liked our Bad at Magic page on Facebook. So if you're a listener and you've not yet liked our Bad at Magic page on Facebook and you would like to have a chance to win one of these 3 $25 gift cards to Cheesecake Factory, go to Facebook and like our page, link in the show notes.
What other social media sites can we interact with Bad at Magic, Ben?
We also have a subreddit that you can go to if you want to join in the discussion. And our website, of course, badatmagic.live. And that's really... Oh, and if you can also go to Patreon if you want to be a supporter of the podcast and show us your appreciation there. I still have some of the Bad at Magic challenge coins left. If you go and become one of our Patreon supporters, I can send you a challenge coin.
If you like what we do, please recommend us to a friend. If you like us, maybe they'll like us too. If you can't get enough of us, take your phone out of your pocket right now and give us a good rating on the podcast player of your choice. It's crazy the kind of visibility we get from just those simple reviews. A couple of clicks on your phone. And like Ben said, if you want to listen to us rant about nonsensical, fictional things forever, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.